Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Neal Green of Double X Knives is a humble, retired Army veteran, husband, father, and cybersecurity wizard, but he also is a darn good knife maker. Neal's clean and functional knife aesthetic has made waves over the years as he constantly pushes himself to isolate what he considers the quintessential knife. He spent years cultivating himself in regiment and precision, and it has no doubt bled into his knife-making process because knife after knife, a consistency and theme emerge, and that's one of a place for everything, and everything has its place. With Neal's knives, everything is on purpose, from his design, to his finish, to his handle material choices, and even the stellar leatherwork he creates. It all screams Neal's inner desire for order out of chaos, and you'll find that everything he creates, it never wavers on expressing his inner vision. Neal, it's great to have you on the Good Old Blades podcast.
Hey, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, I'd like the audience to gain a little bit better perspective of what you do, and I mean, obviously you're a knife maker, right? But something that I try to do is glean a little bit of who a person is, like their knife journey and their life journey through, like their website or things like that. And your website has a lot of your product content and stuff like that on it, but not so much about you and your personal life or your career in the military, things like that. So if you can do me a favor and talk a little bit more about that, I would love to kind of hear it from your mouth versus what I've interpreted through social media.
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the offer to do this. As I was telling you before the show, um, I wasn't aware of this podcast, and so I turned it on over the last few days, and I love it. And so, again, appreciate this opportunity, and then the opportunity to tell my story. So, it's somewhat of a odd journey, I think. I don't know, and to not drag this out as long as it probably could be. On my personal life. So, born and raised in Georgetown, Delaware, which is southern Delaware, and went to college, went to the Army after that, and then the last 20 years been in the Army, and just recently retired in end of September. And in the knife making journey started, in the midst of that. And my hometown volunteer fire company, Georgetown, Delaware Fire Company, they do an oyster roast each year. And at that oyster roast, it's a benefit oyster roast. All proceeds go to the volunteer fire company. And during the roast, they do an auction, and they auction off an oyster knife. And growing up as a kid, you hear about who's going to make the oyster knife this year, Uncle Joe or whoever it may be in the town. And this is a pretty big event for the town, and for southern Delaware, actually. And so anyway, fast forward to I think it was 2011. My dad, I'm off in, I think, Georgia at the time, and my dad was asked to do the oyster knife. And so he did it for a year or two, and then asked me, hey, Neal, look, I can't do this, every year. Do you want to jump in? And so I made an oyster knife for this oyster roast. And again, all proceeds, it's auctioned, and all proceeds go to the volunteer fire company. Everything from equipment to training. And so I made it one year, and I was hooked on knife making. And so I've made not every knife since then, but just about every knife since then. And my dad typically makes the plaque for it. And so these knives, they will auction up to $6,000-$7,000. And so it's something, the journey of how I got started making knives is something I'm proud about, because it started as a I don't know if you want to call it charity or benefit or, goodwill intended, because that money is somewhat significant, for that fire company each year. And so, uh, that's how I got started making knives. The true essence of, what got me into the craft. But I will tell you this, um, I didn't know a thing about knife making when I first started in, the first several years. I'll put it to you this way, and I didn't know knives had to be heat treated. So, I truly didn't know what I was doing, and I'd like to think I've come a long way, but I'm not sure I'm the judge of that.
Yeah, it's when you say that you made this oyster shucking knife. Did you have equipment? Like, I mean, what did your setup look like then? Were you doing stuff kind of um, like hobby style, or did you have equipment from other like purposes or whatever? Like, what exactly what did the seed look like when it came to equipment?
Yeah, it was, a file. And I think after the first year, I got one of those Harbor Freight 1x30s, and I used that for like 2 or 3 years. And then that transitioned into the um, the Grizzly, I don't know, it's like the knife, I think it's called the Grizzly knife making belt sander, which is 2x72. And then it's kind of, just expanded from there. But yeah, the first few years it was on a 1x30 and a buffer, in files, and again, before I understood the concepts, and I wasn't really doing much research on my own. I just knew I liked the craft, and I'd get pieces of rebar, and I tell you, people loved it, but I get pieces of rebar and make the end, put a shine on the end and shape it and put a handle on it, and people loved it. And from there, um, again, this is somewhat not a traditional journey, but because being in the Army, shop space was always dictated by where I was, what kind of house I could get to rent, um, all sorts of things. And, so I was always hesitant to grow my shop because I knew within the next year or two I'd be moving and I have to move it. And we have certain weight allowances and things like that. So I've always been very selective and minimal with the equipment I had. And, um, and, that's kind of in a way limited me, or maybe that's a self-limiting factor. Um, but that's just kind of how it started. And then because of that limitation, I realized that there's a thing called mid-tech knives. And so I got into mid-tech knives for, you know, a few years, probably about 2 years. I realized that, hey, to do this with the minimal amount of time, minimal amount of space, and minimal amount of equipment that I have, I could design and buy, 100 knife blanks for a fraction of what it cost me, to make it myself. And, the specs on it, were great. Again, I started with oyster knives being, the primary knife. Be honest with you, I thought that I was only going to make coastal type knives, fillet knives, coastal cutlery, that sort of thing. My first business name was Tidal Tools and Leather, Tidal like the tide, and that was going to be my shtick. It was going to be coastal stuff, right? So crab knives, clam knives, oyster knives. Not many people out there do this type of cutlery at the custom level. It's all, good stuff like Dexter Russell or something to that effect, but it's not custom. And so I was like, hey, that's a niche I'm gonna get into. And I designed an oyster knife, and it's proliferated. The deal was, when I went to this mid-tech company, the deal was, hey, yeah, you design it and you get a price cut, but we are able to resell that blade blank. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so that design is actually out there quite a bit. now. And so I worked my way through, those oyster knife blanks for, like I said, I don't know, about 2 years. And then I realized, hey, I kind of want to do something a little bit more. I kind of don't want to be just a mid-tech guy. Not that there's by any means something wrong with it, but I wanted to kind of expand um, my capabilities. I wanted to make different knives. I no longer wanted to do just cutlery for just coastal cutlery, that sort of thing. I wanted to do hunting knives. I wanted to do some tactical, and I wanted to do all sorts of stuff. And so I kind of put the blanks on the shelf. I mean, I probably still have 100 or so sitting out in the shop now. And and then I just started designing new designs, and that's really what's led me to where I'm at today. If people ask, hey, when did you start making knives? I started in 2012. And then when did I really make it? When did I become a knife maker? I tell people, I think realistically, probably not until 2017. That's when I really, doing my own thing, new designs, and really had the handle of things. It's probably not until 2017, but that's kind of a little bit more of the story.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, what was your military career like?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat of, in my words, in my eyes, it's a little bit vanilla. I went to University of Delaware. I had a ROTC scholarship, and the final year, my senior year, I decided, hey, I'm probably not going to do the Army for long term. So what would serve a dual purpose for my life after the Army? And I said, I'm going to come back to Delaware. I want to be a state trooper. So I want to do the military police in the Army. That'll, in my mind at the time, I figured that that's what would help me do a transition later down the road. And so I went into the military police. And I did 10 years as a military police officer, and then about, um, right around the 10-year mark, I switched to what's called a functional area, an information systems engineer. And that's IT work, everything from managing a server room to help desk operations. And then the last several assignments, I've been doing cybersecurity stuff. And then that's what I do today. I just retired and transitioned to a cybersecurity job, and I love it.
Well, it's interesting because like I also work in cybersecurity. What is your like job now and entail in cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's pretty boring too. I think to most people it's a lot of paperwork. I am a contractor for on a government contract, and I do really a lot of paperwork. So risk management framework, that sort of thing. Documentation that supports that. Um, make sure all of the T's are crossed and I's dotted. To maintain proper cybersecurity within your systems and boundaries and things like that.
My man, risk management. You know, like it might be the moment where people like tune out. They're like, "Oh God, risk management." But
Yeah, yeah.
like to me, like uh, s- cybersecurity and security mindedness in general is all about some form of risk mitigation. And so, I've actually I say, like, I'm going to knock on some wood here. Using the same methodologies that I use for risk mitigation and other things in security, I haven't really had any big shop accidents. I don't follow like OSHA type of standards, but in the general, like, this is probably a bad idea. Let me do something to help, mitigate risk if this thing should happen. Thinking through that entire process, like down 20, 30 steps, has afforded me more digits and less accidents. And so in the whole like cross disciplinary concept of, you take one thing that you're good at and maybe you apply it to knives or vice versa. That like risk management and mitigation has helped me an awful lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, keeping all your digits is a good thing in life, generally speaking. Yeah, I mean, it is somewhat boring. My transition. So this last year was huge for the Green family. We moved. I retired, but we moved from Colorado Springs to Hampstead, North Carolina, which hopefully will call home for the long term. I retired, which is, significant. It's, any military people listening that went through the retirement process or transition process in general. I mean, it's a significant life change. And then we're building a house as part of like kind of our long-term retirement plan. So three things there, combined, and that's not even talking about, the transition for the kids, right? Losing their friends and all the stuff that's associated with that. Um, but as far as the job and cybersecurity, I mean, the unfortunate thing is, you know, people still pay, like a Nigerian prince still gets paid like millions of dollars each year, and the truth is that with cybersecurity stuff, generally speaking, it is still the simple things that cause people to go under, like password 123 or something simple as that, or clicking on links. And, it's job security for me, but nonetheless, it's almost funny. I mean, at this day and age, the things that still happen.
Oh yeah. um, so early on in the podcast, I had done some micro podcasts, and I thought about getting back into it, but I really I thought about transitioning to having like other knife makers send me in like tips and tricks and things, and then as like co-branding or whatever, be on the Good Old Blades podcast, but then feature those makers that want to share some of their tips and tricks. But one of the first things that I covered was the difference between being hacked and having spoofed accounts, and what some security mitigation or security steps you can take to mitigate having your profiles hacked and whatnot. Because a lot of knife makers are not necessarily technologically literate, and and well, I mean, it's everybody, but it's also salt of the earth makers and whatnot. And a common problem though is like you're using social media, you're trying to sell your goods on it, and your profile gets hacked, and then whatever followers you have, you cannot communicate with them. You have this threat actor masquerading and trying to clip money out off of your customers or followers. And if you don't, like, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and them, they have very few remediation efforts that you can actually get your account back after that happens. And so it's like multi-factor authentication and other things are humongous stopgaps for poor password hygiene and everything. So it's one of those things where identities online is really where the larger amount of theft occurs. And if you're relying on social media, especially for running your business, then you have to either protect it or you really could botch the entire thing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, it's a lucrative business, unfortunately. And again, it's the weakest link philosophy often. They're bad guys are throwing out, a big net, and all it takes is one click, and that's just what they focus in on. Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but just the basics go a long way. I mean, if folks are listening and they're saying, how can they improve it? The FBI website, for example, is, there's tons, but I'm just picking that one because it's pretty easy. They have, open source, how to be a better, more cyber secure person or identity. There's tons of free resources, checklists, or whatever that they can go to and walk through and uh, increase their chances of being a target. or decrease, I guess, their chances of being a target, increase their protective posture.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, that's really kind of the thing is that it's become like I think that as the sophistication in mitigating scams and things like that has like as it's increased, so too the sophistication of threat actors or hackers or whatever has increased, and it's sometimes it's almost imperceptible um, how attacks start. I forget. There was somebody. My wife will probably be embarrassed by this if she ever listens to these shows. But um, there was somebody contacted her on Facebook Messenger, and they had looked, I guess, maybe at her profile somehow and saw that she had something on Marketplace, and basically what they did is they tried to socially engineer her into giving them the G code for multi-factor. So she had multi-factor set up on her accounts, and they
Hmm.
tried to socially engineer her to give her that G code so that way they could authenticate in because they wanted to validate her identity before they bought something from her locally, right?
Yeah.
And the that it's kind of it's smarmy, but it's also like the an average person probably wouldn't realize it. And so she asked me, she's like, this is kind of a little bit weird. This is like this person's asking me for this. And I looked at it, I was like, don't do that. I was like, that's totally a scam. I said, like, what? There's no reason why they should like you should give them G code like to authenticate when there's no Google authentication applications that like validate your personal identity so that way you could sell stuff on Facebook Marketplace. It's not really the way it works. But I looked at it, I was like, dude, those guys, they're ballsy because that shouldn't happen. But a normal citizen would not recognize that kind of threat because it just so happens that in the cybersecurity world, social engineering threats and mitigation is one of my specialties. And so I mean,
Nice.
I looked at that. I was like, no, no, no. Like you can't do that. Like you can't manipulate a manipulator. So we managed to like not have any fallout from that or any of our accounts hacked or whatever. But like maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm trying to think if it was during COVID or not. Maybe it was. Maybe it was like during 2020. Um, somebody was skimmed one of my credit cards, and then through a little bit of research, went on and socially engineered a Wells Fargo agent to move money from my savings account to my checking account, so that way they could then use the credit card that they skimmed to pull it out of an ATM or Western Union it to them.
Hmm.
And that wasn't even I had multi-factor authentication on and all their voice validation stuff, and still it wasn't me that was the threat. It was the Wells Fargo agents, and they verbally talked to somebody and moved money over into an account that was a compromised account, because all like savings accounts are like kind of firewalled off, and they scammed the banking institution. But you call the FBI, whatever, but it doesn't really matter in the corporate world because they have insurance for that now, and they don't really care about trying to track down scammers or increasing their perimeter security. They just let the insurance company deal with it after the fact. So there's almost no recourse other than this long arbitrage process to get your money back because of FDIC and everything.
Sure. No, I mean, I I have a friend that, a coworker, and this was only like 3 years ago, and she flew to another country, um, and gave money to a person who apparently was, a Nigerian prince that just needed it to help. And it is unfortunate that this stuff still happens this day and age. And it's again, almost every incident goes back to a very basic principle. Um, you know, again, clicking on a link that you were sent, you know, answering something like you said through social engineering.
You know, uh, I mean, I agree. The sometimes it's the simplest stuff. I mean, it all really comes down to um, the like human behavior, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, it is a bunch of social engineering, right? Because even in clicking links like that get Facebook hacked, like accounts hacked and whatnot, is like somebody sends you a link because they're I don't know, it's from XYZ knife maker, and you've accepted their friend request or not, and that was a masqueraded or a spoofed account, and so you didn't check the authentication on it, like the authority on it. So that's fine. But then they ask you to click a link or whatever and check something out. You click it, and then you come up with a Facebook page that you were logged out or something. Well, a lot of people don't understand that like you have to click the log out button if you're going to log out of a social media account most of the time, and you type in all of your login information and everything because you don't follow that logical step of maybe this is a little odd and maybe it shouldn't be happening and I probably still logged in, and then you've given that threat actor all of your Facebook information.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, and there's crafty ways. The complexity of it nowadays is it makes it hard to know what's happening. They're compounding basic techniques or simple techniques, and you compound those, and you end up with a very hard to understand scenario, and easily fooled.
Yeah, but it's interesting to me in a lot of ways that I think that there's a certain level of discernment in technology that does aid in the mentality about how to make knives, right? Because at the end of the day, um, we're talking about kind of like binary systems, and there's a logic to technology that can be applied in a rudimentary fashion to knives, like your grind geometry, the mathematics behind it, the steps that are required to be taken to get from a blank canvas of some bar of steel to a final product. And I've always found it, I guess, more mechanically intuitive to come from a world where technology is used than I think some makers that have to get themselves in the mindset of procedure and process. That like the process oriented nature of technology, I think, is well suited, or what it's conditioning people at least to be able to hop into knives and to do some of um, the the more, I guess, rudimentary sides of knife making, not necessarily the artistic interpretation, but the bare bones of making a knife.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I'm a very process and task oriented individual to begin with. Some of that's just my army. Some of it's just who I am in general and in nature. And I can tell you how many checklists I've created in the shop over time. I think now it's all kind of in my head, versus written down. But I'm a believer in that, and so I think it could do folks well, to help them keep track, keep on target, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there's a difference in your knife output than what I see some people create, and I think I think there's different tiers of makers that care about different things or focus on different things, but like the way that you kind of like your aesthetic, like what you've established in your knife making journey, is one of a lot of very clean geometry and angles and fit and finish and whatnot. And like, is that something that you've you've pushed for from the beginning of knife making, or is that something that has evolved with like kind of like your inner eye on how you see a knife being made?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that f first, I guess I'll start with this, is I am a knife guy. I love knives. I love um, tactical, black powder coated, very tactical, get the snot beat out of them knives, and I love, $10,000, art pieces. I love all knives. I really do. In between. And so as a maker, it has been very challenging for me from the get-go of what direction I want to go. Where I was going to go with where I am now. This was years ago, where I am now, where do I want to be, et cetera, et cetera. And I will tell you, I kind of fell in on what I liked to make was clean. I want it clean. I want it crisp. I want it simple, typically very simple. I want it uh, curves, light curves. I don't want a bunch of, things going on. I do like it. The simpler it is, the more I like it. Now, um, I'm not saying every model I have is like that. I'm not saying um, every finish I have is like that. I do kind of do a wide range, and that has been a challenge for me as a maker, is that because I like all different types of knives, it has been hard for me to narrow in on an aesthetic. So I will say that, and I don't by any means want to sound conceited here, but people that come by the table or people that I talk with or friends, etc., other makers, that is a consistent theme. The you like very clean knives. And so I have tried to actually embrace that a little bit more the past, year or two, because that's kind of, it just happened naturally for me. And then as more and more other makers said the same thing, I've kind of tried to embrace that. I do like that. I mean, I'm not saying I don't like it, but it actually has helped me kind of land on a style that I can call my own and that others recognize as mine. And I will tell you that Kressler is probably like the number one style that I have on the shelf that I try to, as I'm making knives, I look up every once in a while and um, shoot to that level of crispiness, if you will. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with design and style and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. But like the way that everybody thinks of clean is different, right? I mean, I know like if you take some of the ABS Mastersmiths, for instance, their interpretation of that the Bill Moran style of knives and where everything is at today is a little bit different, but very unique in the ABS vein of knife making, and they grade you or judge you off of that, and there's a little bit more variability when you look at like guild members. You can make a clean knife, but the stylization varies from maker to maker. Like Paul Liebetard is not the same as Edmund Davidson. Is not the same as Gary Langley or Todd Begg or any other um, uh, top knife maker inside of that organization. And there's no different when you look in the knife making world holistically. I mean, everything that Smith does with Montana Knife Company, all of those have their own aesthetic, but it's very clean based on kind of the progression of his thought and his aesthetic.
Yeah. No, I mean, this has been a big struggle for me over the years, and I don't know. I think that, matter of fact, I went to Blade Show West, I guess about a month ago now, and I was talking to a buddy, and I was telling him this. I was like, I still have a problem of what is my style? What is my, um, picking my knife out from a line of others. And, he's like, nah, I definitely can. And, here's why. And again, it goes back to the clean and simple kind of aesthetic. I also like small details. I don't know how to quite explain it. But I'm big into small details. So things that what I enjoy walking through, Blade Show Atlanta, I enjoy walking through and picking up the knives because I can see the details I can't see from an Instagram picture. And I like to have to pick up the knife to see all of the details. So, for example, a lot of the pins I do now, not they won't always be, but pretty much the models I'm making forward. They're like 1/16 pins, small details, so small chamfers and things like that that you really have to pick it up. I mean, even the liners, a lot of times, if you're holding it further than an arm's length away, some of the liners you can't even tell they're in there because it's very small, hard to notice detail, but that detail is there. And I don't know what you call that. I don't know, but that's as I progress, that's where I lean towards my personal liking.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is an elegance um, to fine details, and I mean, I noticed that in a lot of things that are. I'm trying to encapsulate this idea. So you take old Sheffield slip joints and cutlery, right? And there are certain aesthetic decisions that a master cutler would put in a knife that maybe at face value it wouldn't seem like very much, but it just adds to the ambiance of like that really wasn't necessary, but you put it in and it makes sense to my eye. Like it flows well or whatever. It's the same reason why people do, file work, or they put jimping on, or they contour their handles a certain way, or their handle material choices. All of that kind of evolves into an aesthetic. And that's something that I've actually enjoyed about following you on social media is I can't say that there's a specific knife that I put my finger on and say that that's yours, right? But I can definitely tell from the blade finish, from the pin placement, from the handle material, and general design where like that they're yours, right? There's certain types of clean work that are and that aesthetic that establish a maker or identify them. And I've always been able to pick your knife out from a fairly large lineup and say I know exactly who that is.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly appreciate that. Um, I look forward to trying different things. So like I told you, we're building a house now. And things have kind of changed from years ago before the big, you know, cost and building materials. My goodness. But we're building a house right now. Again, we're calling this place home, hopefully for long term. Part of that is a shop. I'm going to have a detached shop. First time, having that ever. And so it's not huge. I mean, I think it's about 600 square foot, not including the storage space up above. So it's still pretty small for one person. Um, but I'm looking forward to getting in there. I'm looking forward to being able to get some equipment that I haven't really been able to do before. And some of that may hopefully, lend to additional things that I can do with the knives in the shop. But yeah, time will tell. I mean, with the cost of things, I had to put a couple of the shop upgrades on hold, and all the money's going towards the shop itself versus I was hoping to move in and be able to get equipment, but that'll be delayed, but in due time.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a level of freedom in being able to detach yourself from the style of knife, like the profile of knife, and be able to apply a recognizable aesthetic to any type of knife that you do. Like for instance, I've always admired your interpretation of the Tony Bo Zulu spear fixed blade. And you mix it up in a lot of ways that I'm like, dude, this is a totally fresh look and feel to a knife that not that many people have really touched. If you think about it, Tony and Reese would make it, and a few of their fairly close friends and associates, but it's not a pattern that is that's replicated across a large portion of the industry. But I've always liked the slip joint Zulu spear, and I've liked the making the fixed blade version. And yours takes it to a different level because you really have like a production quality of fit and finish to it, and I mean that in a good way with fixed blades because it looks near perfect. And with the the finishes that you're putting on the blade and the handle material choices and things like that, I think that it it reimagines a quasi traditional pattern, and you're really not limited to a hunting knife or a tactical knife or whatever. You can kind of play in a lot of different profile or pattern mediums because you've established yourself as somebody who has a fit and finish aesthetic over a particular type of pattern. I guess loyalty, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. Man, I love that. I love that profile. I love that knife, and I think that a lot of my words, no one else's, I think a lot of those designs, his designs, are very simple. And I've always liked simple. Um, I've tried, designs, makers, etc. The greats that really stand out to me are the ones that had fairly simple designs, but obviously, phenomenal fit and finish, and that's those are the knives I've bought over the years, put on the shelf, and I look up at them when I'm making. I mean, and I'm saying this in a literal sense. I put them on the shelf, and I'm like, hey, is this up to this person's quality? And often it's not yet, but that's why it's there. Um, but I do, one, I appreciate what you're saying, and two, that is, it's good to hear because that's some of that's what I've been going for. I think some of my story or projection is some of those classic simple designs with um, modern technology, whether that's handle materials or steel or finish or something to that effect. I think is another kind of angle or path that I often like to go down.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the. I don't know what your naming is, but the is it the attention getters like the pen pokey things like what are
Yeah, yeah, pokey pokey.
yeah. So what I'm interested to know like what the process is for these. Do you get them like machined out for those push daggers or push implements and whatnot? Like kind of what got you started going down that route?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was honestly not a great story. My son did archery for a little while. He took archery lessons. I mean, it was like a group lesson, like an event, every Saturday, and there was a broadhead or arrow tip on the ground, and I picked it up, and held it in my hand, and I was thinking, I was like, man, this would be a cool little self-defense tool if it only had a handle on it. I gave the arrowhead back, whatever, at the front desk, and came home and I ordered some arrowheads, and it really just took off from there. And I mean, um, you know, it is, yes, kind of a self-defense tool. That was the purpose of it. Small, something very small, and I kind of have two different flavors, if you will. One with kind of like a full handle, straight full handle, and then the other in a couple of different variations, but kind of the T-shape, um, push dagger type of handle, and they are arrowheads. They screw in, and they're uh, they're nothing more than that. The cool thing is that they're interchangeable. You put the um, the plug in there, right? And then the arrow tip changes in and out, so you can literally buy them at home if you wanted a different type of style and change it. And then people just loved them, and it's something that's cheap. Because people loved them, I cranked out a handful and I took them to Blade Show West, and people loved them. I mean, they're something cheap for the table, inexpensive, I should say, for the table. That if folks just kind of want to buy something, that they're not spending a couple $100 on a knife, but something that um, the common trend, quite honestly, is this is something my wife or daughter can put in her purse. That's like, um, not to sound sexist, it's just that was like 9 out of 10 people. That's what their thought was behind it. And yeah, I just kept doing it because people loved it.
I've gotten the same kind of thing with my smaller, daintier knives, I guess you'd call it. People would pick them up and say, "Oh, that's a lady's knife," and I've never. I mean, I guess I understand because the industry breeds large knives, and large knives apparently are the thing right now. But I've never found in all of the years that I've done hunting or survival type of stuff, like anything where I've been outdoors doing stuff, that that a large knife is inherently more beneficial to me than a small knife. And in fact, all of the hunting and fishing and outdoor stuff I've done, there's very few scenarios where I need something big, and it's mostly for kindling and brush clearing and whatnot. But I've like a small knife is almost indispensable to me, especially when cleaning game and whatnot. So, I mean, I don't really think. Um, I don't think that the um, utilitarianism of your push sticks or pokies. Do you have a specific like name for them? Like, 'cause you have like a um, different models and whatnot.
Yeah, so the first year I made them, the first year I went to Blade Show, Texas, driving down from Colorado Springs. The first year I went there, I said, people made the recommendation to me, oh, your first show, here's a few recommendations, whatever. And one of the recommendations was, hey, make something small for your table too, right? Like have your knives, of course, but have one or two small things. That way, if you have some supporter out there that wants to walk away with something, it's something that they can. So I took that to heart, and because I had such overwhelming positive response to these things, I called them attention getters. Obviously a play on words, but it did have two meanings. One, you could definitely use it to get someone's attention, and for the table it was something to grab someone's attention to my items on the table. So the long handled ones with the tip, they were attention getters. And then when I went to a push dagger style, the first design I had was kind of like a golf tee shape, so I named it golf tee. Again, somewhat of a play on words to, uh, not be blatant. Hey, these are get off me type tools. And so just a little bit of play on words there. So attention getter and golf tee.
Yeah, I think that's great. But the utility of it. I mean, I could see carrying those in a lot of different scenarios. And dude, I love the modularity of being able to have different tips. So basically, what you're selling is not necessarily the tip. It's the base, so that way other people can put their stuff on. Which, if you ever get into like hot water in social media context or whatever, you can always sell the base without the tip, and then it's not actually a quote unquote weapon. It's just the holding device for the tips that they can then source wherever they want to, and that opens up that to a broad range of possibilities. You could have all sorts of modularity to the poking or cutting edge.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Recently I had a run of three fixed style. So I have one that's an actual push dagger. I have one that is a divot tool, an actual divot tool end, and one that's a bottle opener end. I've only done a few of them so far, um, but they're like, full tang fixed, I don't know, just call them, fixed blade style. Um, and I like them. Just haven't done many of them yet.
Yeah, that's cool. I've always liked the oyster shucker too, but I've not made them mostly because there's a few guys that make them out there, you being one of them. But I really don't have any real practical experience in shucking oysters because I'm not going to eat oysters in Texas especially when they come from the Gulf. And so I'm just not interested. So I mean, I like to try to make stuff that I have some practical knowledge over, and hunting and skinning knives and stuff like that is more what I'm used to, just because I know that I can test it and test it effectively. Like my scalpels, I skinned almost an entire 6.5 foot alligator this summer with one of my scalpels. I mean, I used some other knives to get through some of the plating, but by and large, most of the skinning was done on a scalpel.
Yeah, no, and I heard that story on one of your other podcasts. It's a pretty cool story. Scalping a gator. But going back to like why I got started making knives, or what, the oyster knife itself. When I first started, I said, shoot, if I can make an oyster knife. I mean, when you think about it, an oyster knife cuts into a rock. It cuts a rock, shell, and it goes through the abuse of it's always consistently wet. It's salt water at that, right? And cutting a rock in salt water, and people leave that thing. Often without, washing it in a drawer or something like that. And, harsh conditions, in my words. I said, if I can make an oyster knife withstand the abuse an oyster knife goes through, I feel like you can make about just any type of knife. And again, I'm generalizing, but, um, it did. I had a guy reach out to me. It was last year, and he bought one of my early works, and he worked at an oyster bar. He was I don't know what you call them. And I think he was like one of the owners. Anyway, so he goes, "Hey Neal, I know you have a maker's lifetime warranty, and my knife is kind of, it's really getting worn down here." And I said, "Okay, well, how many oysters have you opened up with it?" And he's like, "Oh, thousands, right? Thousands of oysters." I'm like, "Well, dude, if you've opened thousands of oysters, you're gonna see some wear and tear. It's just natural, that's natural wear and tear. Thousands of oysters, again, it's like cutting a rock." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. Look, send it back to me, and I'll see if I can't spruce it up. I'll see, if it's all else fails, I'll replace it." And which is a in my opinion, very generous, and thing. That's my philosophy. And so he sends this thing back, and I'm thinking it's going to be looks like it, I'm thinking it's going to be like World War II beachfront, like worn out, No, I mean, the thing is great. I tell you, the thing looked phenomenal for opening thousands of oysters. And what I had was, I had a burlap micarta on it. And, after, again, thousands of oysters, and they probably have those texture grips on or gloves on, and burlap micarta is going to get a wear on it, and fibers start being exposed, etc. And that's what it was. And I was very happy to receive it back like that, because if it held up with that many oysters, um, in my eyes, extreme success of the construction of it.
Yeah, yeah, because even in the context of making like hunting and skinning knives, the most that I really expect out of a like any given blade that I make is to be able to skin to skin and parts out up to about three reasonably sized white-tailed deer. I think that that's kind of the litmus test, without needing any more than maybe a blade strop. If I can uh, make a blade that has the like good geometry, that there's no hot spots on the handle, and it can skin out and quarter up to three deer without needing it to be touched up too much. That to me is a sign of success, because there's not there's not a lot of situations other than like Texas has MLD where they get browsing studies done, and maybe they have to kill you know 20, 30 deer on a big property or whatever a year, sometimes more, sometimes less. There's really not a lot of commercial skinning and quartering and stuff like that. So, a few medium to large size wild game animals. That's kind of what I look for. But thousands of oysters, man, that's it's pretty rad to be able to have that level of abuse to a knife, and to have the handle fail before the steel.
Yeah, I agree. And it wasn't even a failure. I mean, it was just wear. The micarta was just starting to have some fibers break loose, because I typically buff my handles, most of my stuff, before I send it out. And yeah, some of the burlap fibers were just starting to come, fray loose. And yeah, I was pretty happy. But I will say, like, I think it's important that you just mentioned a standard. Like, hey, your standard is three deer, whatever that is. I think that's important for a maker to have a standard. I'm not sure that what the standard is. Uh, I think that's less important, that the maker has some sort of standard, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the standards change depending on the use too. I think now it's difficult in the tactical world, like making tactical or tactical things, because there's not a lot of scenarios where you're going to get real world like practical experience on how well something works, and when you do have to use it, it's usually like life or death. But you can take relational type of wear tests and things like that, and in general, kind of guide yourself on like heat treat ergonomics and stuff. But that's something that in like not military, but have grown up and been around that world an awful lot. Um, the the tactical and tactical type of culture, to me, is a frustrating one, because there's obviously an aesthetic to like the tactical type of knife, but the customer base is definitely there and dedicated towards buying it. But it's really it's to me it's really difficult to navigate those waters, because I've always been a practical guy, so I want my knives to be used and be useful. But that's just one way that I can't really, I can't test them, and I also don't see them being used actively unless it's like EDC. So I mean, everybody's like opening boxes and stuff, and it's like, well, at that point, one blade is really not a lot better than the other, and you could just buy like a small box cutter and be more effective in that than spending hundreds of dollars on a knife. So sometimes I've talked myself out of sales, because I'm like, I don't really know if this is something that you need, based on the fact that you just order a bunch of stuff from Amazon.
Yeah, no, I agree. And earlier today, when I was trying to kind of catch up on some of your podcasts, you had the micro. Um, Apologies if I get the name wrong, but the micropod where you talked about your size, the size of the knives that you do, and the purpose of them. And I am very, I mean, it's literally what uh, same philosophy that I have. I don't have a knife that's um, bigger than like 7.25 inches, and I'm very while I want the knife to be used and used hard and heavily, um, they're, you know, really kind of meant for utility tasks, whether you use it to skin a deer. I've had some people do that, or, Amazon package killers. That's what I call, I would I would put a gamble, or I would gamble or put a bet on that the average person opens a heck of a lot more Amazon packages than they do skinning deer. It's just, call me crazy, but I certainly do. You know what I mean? Like, I tear them packages up, but I don't really skin a deer. So utility, I'm a big believer in that. I'm like you. I think that you only need an inch or two really for most tasks, and that's what I enjoy, and so that's what I do. That's what I focused on. I agree with your kind of comments about the tactical. I've got a couple of tactical designs, but I've never really taken them through all the way. But I tell you too, like in tactical scenarios, you want something that's can kind of take that abuse and not to speak for you, but again, I think we do have a lot of similar styles in fit finish and that sort of thing, and that while my knives could certainly be used in any of the scenarios, I think the average person that's buying my knife is not going to want to put it through that um, type of abuse, whether it could take it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I've also, in the whole utility type of realm of things, I've also struggled over the years with pricing things because, there's a difference between a maker valuing their time and their expertise and, and paying for the equipment and whatnot it takes to make a certain type of product and then being able to sell it to a customer at that price, right? So, like, on average, my knives range from like 325 to, let's just say, 850, 875 maybe. Which is pretty broad, but there are things that affect price for me more in the materials and things, so like the rarity of mammoth or good stag or hard to find desert ironwood burl or things like that, right? If the rarer it is and the harder it is for me to replace, obviously the price is a little bit higher. But um, that is all based on material and my time. But again, like kind of like to the point I'm making is sometimes it's difficult for me to want to like really push a knife that's like $300, $400, $500 because if it is just for pure utility, there's lots of tools out there that are just as good at cutting, maybe just not as pretty or interesting. And I have to leverage that, I guess, the moral or ethical decision to sell to a customer or really try to, manipulate or push their buttons into buying something simply because I made it. And I guess that's kind of like a difficult spot to be in because I definitely don't undercharge for a lot of my knives. I don't feel like I overcharge, but in that sweet spot where it makes it worth my time, it can be a little bit difficult to for some people to necessitate it, especially in the tactical world. Like I have a few knives that are really really kind of geared towards tactical carry and being able to be utilized overseas. But a lot of service members like cannot afford a $400 or $500 knife. One because it doesn't, because it has to take a lot of abuse, and if it's real expensive, like I had a buddy who was out of country, and he lost like a $300-400 knife, and it kind of pissed him off because it was one of his favorite knives, and he lost it on private detail, and it's like he can't just easily replace knives like that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great point. I think that's definitely the mindset of a lot of folks. There's a lot of people in the army, that are into knives, but even if they do spend that kind of dollar amount on them for most tasks, they're going to take their less expensive one out there just in case they do lose it or um, need it in some sort of scenario where they use the knife knowing that it could get damaged. That that dollar amount isn't impacted, or isn't as much of an impact on their wallet.
Yeah, I mean, something about hunting, and this is kind of one of the reasons why I do hunting and skinning sets is, I've always felt that there's kind of a, this might sound weird, but kind of like a spiritual connectedness that you have when you harvest your own game, right? And because of that, it's somewhat of a ritual. You go out and it's a lot of like mental preparedness. It's a lot of physical preparedness. You go out and hunt game, and if you're lucky enough to shoot and kill something, then dressing your game is also something that should kind of be done with a level of reverence. And because of that, I've always thought that having a nicer like hunting set or hunting knife is a good companion because it symbolizes reliability. It symbolizes beauty in a otherwise pretty pretty ugly, pretty messy process of harvesting your own game, right? And it's so I've thought at least that the at the very least that I could do is make a really nice looking hunter or skinner, so that way when you're taking it out, you have that experience, the whole experience where you harvesting game and hunting or whatever means something to you because you have the right tools, you were at the right time, and you harvested your game in a respectful and reverent manner. So to me, it seems worth it to have something like that, even though you could use a box cutter or a pocket knife or whatever to skin the same game. It's not maybe as ritualistic or reminiscent of that place of respect that I think hunting should take.
Yeah, so I fish, I don't hunt. I've hunted once, I think, um, except for when I was a little kid. But I have a buddy who's big deer hunter, and I made a knife for him years ago. And to your point, each well, not each year, but just about each year, when he gets a big buck or something like that, he'll send me a picture, right? And he'll say, the knife, did its job again, or something to that effect. And so I do think that there's a lot of truth in what you're saying, that for some folks, there's a kind of a ceremonial type um, representation there to the knife, to that, you know, primal hunting victory, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I attribute that same mentality towards fishing too. Like, I don't think I've ever really been in a scenario with fishing where, apart from like catfishing and using jug lines and stuff, where the take home has been um, easier than like the effort put forth. Like, there's lots of fishing trips where maybe you get skunked, or maybe you have a decent haul, and uh, and being able to clean those things out afterwards is it's not the that's not the fun part. It's the same way like a bird hunters. You go out and hunt dove, or you hunt dove with a group, or duck. Like yeah, you can kill those things and have fun shooting them out of the sky or whatever, but then you have to pluck them, or you have to breast them out, or things like that. And you want to have something that holds up, and it's no different than fishing. I don't think like reliability and efficiency is a big deal. And if you're constantly having to like sharpen that thing, it makes it less, I guess, euphoric in some ways of the catch. If you just have to like saw through things and you can't really do a good job of cleaning out game either.
Yeah, I mean, I think an age-old dilemma for certain knife makers. You know, you want it both beautiful and functional. So, yeah, it can be a tough one depending on, what type of maker you are.
Yeah. Well, kind of on that note, um, I think that in addition to your knife aesthetic, I'm actually really interested in your leatherwork aesthetic and your sheath making aesthetic, because it seems to me that as pretty as your knives are, you also have an equally good looking sheath. Like, was it your goal when you started making knives to also represent that same kind of tenacity and the same kind of aesthetic that you have in your knives inside of your leather work and whatnot?
Yeah, I'm glad this came up actually. So leatherwork has been a huge part of my knife making career. So, you know, a couple years in, again, was still primarily focused on the oyster knives. So at the fairly beginning of the career, knife making career, if you will. It's still just a side thing, by the way. I kept having this dilemma of my sheaths weren't as nice as in my eyes, that as the knives were, and I wanted that to be an equal balance. So, 50-50 split. And it took a lot of my time. I just like barreled down and really tried to improve my sheath game. And through that process, I became a custom sheath maker for like, I don't know, 2, 3 years. And it got to the point where I was doing way more sheath work, custom sheaths, than I was knives. And it got to the point where that was kind of like depressing me. I wanted to make knives. I wanted to be known as a knife maker versus a sheath maker. And I had to stop it. And through that process is kind of where I learned my leather skills, and where I got a lot of leather time under my belt. And yeah, it's been very important to me that the sheath is equal to the knife. And I like leather work, and that was part of it. And I had some leather lines, like model type things out there that again was a large part um, of the trajectory of where I've come from.
Yeah. Well, I cannot say that I followed that same path. Like, slowly my sheath making has uh, become better. But like, even my wife was like, you make a really good knife, but your sheaths suck. And I'm like, well, like you're right. Like, I mean, I did. It took me a little while. I was like, you know what? That's kind of a crappy thing to say. And she's like, but you like, my job is to be honest with you in this thing, not like pad your ego. And I was like, it took me just a minute, and but she was right. I spent way more effort working on the knife and cobbled together a sheath. Now, like, don't get me wrong, like, my sheaths, I always did saddle stitches. They were also adhesed together with contact cement. They were not going anywhere. Like, they were
Hmm.
robust things, but they were clunky. The stitching wasn't always the most accurate. The finish work wasn't the greatest. I hate it. Like, I'm not. I don't treat leather work in the same regard as knives, and I guess that's why, to some extent, I've contracted out for some of that. But there is a portion of me that's like, I should be good at that. Like, the same mentality of the vocation of knives should translate to leather work. I just don't. I don't really have the room, I guess, like, have an equally efficient and productive workspace for leather as I do for knives. And because of that, I don't. I mean, I think the leather suffers to a certain extent. But I even see that fairly high up in the echelon of knife makers, that if they don't contract out, and they're not good leather makers that the pants for the suit just don't match. And that's something that I think that everybody should at least think about is um, like what story are you telling with your knife, and then how does your sheath either promote that and accompany it, or how does it detract from it? Because I think that a customer looks at the knife and they look at the knife and it's great, but they're sold on the sheath. And if those two things marry well together, then it makes it a value proposition that is sometimes hard to turn down for a customer.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have spent a lot of time with this, discussions with other makers on this topic. Again, because you know, there was a point in time where I was doing nothing but custom sheath work, and I had a lot of knives come through. I mean, I saw a lot of makers, um, work in my hand, and some of those experiences have changed me as a maker. Um, and I one, I don't think there's any harm in having someone else do it. I mean, it's just like anything else. I'm a believer in if there is a process in making that for whatever reason you just absolutely hate or you just dislike, or maybe it takes you too long. I'm the type of guy, like, I don't see any harm at all in contracting it, like you said, or going with outsource, outsourcing that work. Again, because for me, it hasn't ever been the primary job. It hasn't been my primary job. Like, a lot of that was time based. You know what I mean, for certain things. So, yeah, I mean, that journey, that sheath making, leather working, matching the knife style and quality has, it has consumed me for years. So it's near and dear to my heart, like that topic, that subject itself. And it's kind of funny, when I'm at shows, because they're like, "Oh, you did the sheath too? Oh," and it can make a difference. Well, I'll tell you, it has made a difference for me in a lot of scenarios. I mean, didn't I'm not telling you it sold more knives. I'm just telling you it did get noticed. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my difficulty comes in two forms. If I have to be like analytical about kind of like the things that I don't like or the things that I don't feel are intuitive to me. One is blocking out the leather. So I mean, any like cutting angles or things, I always feel like I botch that up, and then I have to spend forever trying to sand it or whatever. And it's kind of like, well, I'm basically just grinding a sheath instead of cutting it out correctly. And I don't have like a clicker or anything like that. And I like there's too much variability in patterns and sizes and whatnot for me to really do that. But the other is some finishing techniques. Like at what time is appropriate to bevel your edges and to burnish them and things like that. And um, I don't know. Like it's something that I'd like to get better at, but there's always been this lack of efficiency or lack of time where I'm like mm, I I just rather send them out. But something that's increased my um, efficiency or kind of like worked out some of those problems is that I'm not too bad at designing things out digitally, and I have a diode laser table that I can cut things out on. So what I've chosen to do in some scenarios is actually design everything, get all the specs right, and then burn the leather profiles out, and maybe even the stitching holes and whatnot. And uh, um, that's made it easier, I think.
Yeah. No, I heard you mention that before, and I don't have a laser yet. Um, I've seen other people do it and have a lot of success, so that's cool to hear that you've had success doing it. If What I recommend for people that cut the same shape over and over again, um, is that I would actually, so if I had to do it and I had the same sheath time and time again, but I still wanted to do some of it myself versus fully contracted out, or um, I would have a clicker die made, but I would send that to some of a lot of the leather shops, like the bigger name ones. I don't know if Weaver does it, but like Zach White, for example, he's in North Carolina. Like you send him the clicker die, and then you just call him up and say, "Hey, I need 25, 7 to 8 ounce of dye number one," right? And he'll cut them out, and he charges you for a little bit for the time, a little bit for the leather, obviously, and he ships them to you. And I will tell you, if I made the same pattern over and over and over again, to me, that's the most efficient way to do it. It arrives already cut. Um, he's got all the equipment there that does it, and then you just, you put it together, sew it, etc., and send it off. But that, to me, I haven't done that, but to me, that is probably the most efficient way to do it if you kind of wanted to split it down the middle, because you could still do tooling that way too, right? Like if you wanted to put your stamp on it, if you wanted to put your tooling on it, or some sort of whatever the scenario is, you still have the flexibility to do it that way.
Yeah, yeah, because punching holes I think is probably also kind of a pain, like to get it exactly centered the way you want to, and to not mess up or mar your leather. There's just so many there's so many finer points to the technique of leather work that like uh, doing natural leather finish and everything like that versus dyeing it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had natural leather. Like I started there, and it stained it for some reason or another because of something oil or dirt or whatever. And the only way is to go with a black dye job to kind of erase that thing.
Oh yeah. So for better or worse, like I've helped people with their leather work, answer questions. I'm an open book. And I spend a lot of time talking with people back and forth about my tips and techniques, etc. And I will tell you, Aaron, that is probably the number one. If not number one, definitely number two. But if not, the first thing I recommend is like, hey, if you're gonna dye your leather, um, and do any amount other than like one, then buy dyed leather. Um, I don't know. I don't want to sound condescending when I say that, but I will tell you, it, buying vat dyed leather um, is the biggest jump in look, in my opinion, the biggest improvement in overall appearance that you can have, because it is so hard to evenly dye leather by hand. Again, there are people out there that do a great job. There are techniques, applying oil or water to it ahead of time, which will help you get an even dye. But I'm telling you, in my opinion, the number one way to make a huge improvement of magnitude with appearance of your sheath is starting with good pre-dyed leather. And from there, there's still a lot of, ways to improve, but that's like a huge jump right there.
Yeah, I think I forget who it is on Weaver Leather Craft or whatever. Got me kind of into this dip dye process, but it goes you go through
Sure.
a lot of dye that way, and I I agree. There's been some like Latigo or whatever sides that I've bought that are black, and I've used them for everything. But I think that I don't know why the finish like the finishing technique of that is better than me doing in-house dyeing. But I would agree for general colors, like not like real crazy stuff. I would just buy dyed leather too.
Yeah, I mean, good leather isn't cheap. It really isn't. And you know, um, I don't know. I just that's what made a huge difference to me. It was one of those, like when you're as a maker, there's certain things where you do this, whether it's a process change or a materials change or a tool change or whatever it is, and then you're like, oh my gosh, why did I not do that years ago? Well, for me, that was one of them. That was one of the things I was like, why did I not do? Why have I been trying to dye leather all this time? And anyway, so I like to share that with folks. Like to encourage folks to start with good pre-dyed leather. From the get-go, if they're going to be doing anything, you know, any amount of work making their own sheaths.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'd like to talk a little bit about the guild and you going through the process for that. What made you decide to pull the trigger on having your knives inspected and getting into the Knife Makers Guild?
Yeah. Oh man. Vehement Knives. Um, do you know them?
Yeah, Matt Martin and Jenna.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Matt. I'm
yeah,
sorry. I apologize. I could not think of his name. Um, Matt. He's so at Blaine Show, Texas, 2 years ago. Yeah, I think 2 years ago, he stopped by. It was like closing time, and there was pretty much nobody left in the place except makers kind of still milling around and talking with one another. And they were coming by, and he stopped, and we spoke for a long time. And he said, "Hey, have you thought about joining the guild and this and that?" And so I never had given it much thought. And anyway, so I looked into it, and I mean, here we are. And I, still need to uh, present. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make Texas this year. Just kind of coincidentally, the date change did. I just can't do it now, and I will be at Atlanta, so I will have my knives ready for Atlanta for voting status. And then also, I'm part of the North Carolina Custom Knife Makers Guild, so I'm a believer in the guilds, and I think they are great resources. I think they are great ways to go for new and veteran knife makers alike. But yeah, that's where I stand.
yeah. So, what do you think about the inspection process and everything? And did it meet your expectations with kind of what the like your perception of the guild and everything?
Yeah, I think so. I was open to whatever came my way. You know, i- the feedback I think is critical for improvement. I think it's necessary for improvement. I think it's um, even if you don't do anything with that information. I think that it's like you were saying earlier, like, your wife, she's not gonna just blow smoke, right? Like part of it is for her to be honest and that. So I think an organization, whatever that is, or even if it's just a friend or a wife or whatever, like someone's got to be honest with you about, you know, work. And so going through the inspection process, I'm not gonna lie, like I knew that there were probably at least one or two things that um, obviously you did the inspection or part of it. So, but I knew that there were going to be a few things that were going to be said. Um, but that, even knowing that, it is, it is good to hear it, right? Like it's good that, okay, my assumptions or, my viewpoint is in alignment with other experienced makers, um, based on this factor or based on this reason. So, no, I mean, I think it was great. I think I would again, I'd recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, that's encouraging because I think that in the past the guild has gotten a reputation for gatekeeping and drama. And I'm a voting member. I've invested a lot in trying to help the guild usher in like the technological age, like having a modern website and a up to date database and whatnot. And there's a few of us that are very interested in making the guild more transparent, especially with the way that the guild was perceived versus the way that it is now, right? But um, kind of to that point, there are definitely comments that I've received when I was going through the inspection process and everything that I had to sit and think a little while about, because I'm definitely not a just like unsolicited advice. Just tell me how my knife should be. I'm more interested in does this meet the specifications for inspection, and if you have any advice, then I'll accept that. But I think that's important because so many knife makers judge or are critical of other knife makers because of the aesthetic choices that they make. And it's like, for instance, I don't do a lot of taper tang work. I've been able to skeletonize handles and distribute out weight to the point where I think that probably taper tangs are a little bit marginal balance or decrease in weight for me. But I mean, I'm also dealing with like smaller knives. But I'm actually talking to a buddy about testing those theories out and doing a little bit more extensive research into taper tangs versus skeletonization and so on and so forth to see what the balance factors are like and what the weight reduction is like, and whether it's down to grams or tens of grams, or kind of what that looks like. But I mean, suffice it to say is that I think I think that when I wanted to join the guild, it was to get validation, because I'd been a kind of like the hermit knife maker, just in my shop doing my own thing, watching videos, reading books, making a lot of mistakes, and I needed to have something that gave me some type of validation that I was going in the right direction, and that I had some standing with my peers who were doing the same but different things. And I always want to make sure that when we're doing inspections in the guild, that the takeaway is that you actually benefit from the feedback, whether you use that or not in your own work. It's just like observations on ways that you can, think about the construction or aesthetic of a knife a little bit differently, depending on kind of what you're going for with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's some of it too, where you as a maker, are you in it for the art? Are you in it for the craft, craftsmanship and that sort of thing? Are you in it because it's a profession you can make what money you want to make? Are there's some of that, I think, that's in it. And I think that things like a guild, you have to more often, I think you are typically the type that, while it may be your income, but you're also a believer in the profession. You're a believer in the craft. And us part-timers, we're obviously more typically, not always, but typically in it more for the craft because we enjoy it. And so things like a guild are other ways for us to learn, are other ways for us to just talk with other like-minded knife people, So I think some of it's that, because it's like, I mean, if you are in it, and bear with me because I don't mean just for the money in a negative way. I mean, if you're in it because, hey, like you're good enough to make a living at it, so that's what you choose to do, that, you know, I'm not sure that makes a difference for you, right? Like there's tons of these of manufactured knives, of uh, you know, um, folders and things like that, manufactured, whether it's a single or multi-employee company. Like a lot of those guys, I don't think, but I don't know for sure. I don't think they're in the guild because, they like what they're doing too, but they're not, in it for as much of the craft, I think. But I don't know. I mean, I think some of that's subjective too, because the more I'm talking, the more I'm mentally debating my own self. So I
No,
don't know.
hey,
There
hey,
you go.
hey, listen, no backpedaling. No, no, I get it, right? So I think if I try to break down um, the reason why we do things like this, right? I mean, arguably, if I found pottery to be more interesting, I'd learn to do pottery, and I'd probably be able to figure it out. If I dedicated more time to leather crafts, I'd probably be pretty, decent at it. If I got back into jewelry, I could do all sorts of crazy stuff. And I think what like arguably a lot of people are like that, a lot of in knives, it's just one modality of expression of self exploration that somebody chooses. And I can't say that I like if you like I can't marginalize the CNC or the production crowd because there's just different things that you focus on, right? Um, like getting a machine to help make something repeatable, but handle that repeatability in a way that seems organic, right? Like I've been working with Jim Skelton and his website and whatnot. He's doing these production folding knives and working with Tuya. And I have to say, like Tuya has been able to do some really incredible grind work and incredible fit and finish to take Jim's designs and convert them into like a reproducible knife that is also economic for people. And I have to think that at some point, I talked with Lucas Cow at Squid Industries that does balisongs and whatnot, and the passion is just it's focused towards like I use this thing, but I want to have the machinery help to do it in a way that I can get it out to the masses, and I can do it in a efficient and less expensive manner and still have people use them and whatnot. And so I think that as like as people kind of change what industrial focus that they have, maybe it's not really exactly the money. Although I think that that's a compelling component if you can get the efficiency down pat, that the money does come. But I think really all of us just have a desire to problem solve and to get to a place of our own expression and artistic mind, and whether it's production, semi-production, whether it's tools or knife, like just edged like blades and things. I do think that there's still that base desire to create and to figure out how to do it in a way that is pleasing internally, and that's the driving force, regardless of whether it's money or not.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's something I see as a long term passion of mine. There's some of that too. It's a long term as passion. Like I said at the very beginning of this discussion, is like I love knives. And so for me, some of the guild is just that, is that you know, there's some sort of base there that hey, you're good enough, or you're at a certain level, to allow you to vote on certain things. So some of that for me on a personal level. And like you said, Matt, they were the first ones to talk to me about it, and then at a subsequent show, I shared a table, like our tables butted up together with Brad Zinker, and what a phenomenal guy there. And within that, I don't know, 16 hours, a nice show. I learned more there, just him talking to me about certain things. And he went and essentially like got me to really go over the edge and seek to join. But yeah, I'm a believer. I think it's a way, not the only way to share a craft, for improvement. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, but I think there's also, well, if I think about the guild holistically, right? A bunch of knife makers got together in the 70s and formed a group that was a co-op to be able to have shows, right? And to hold each other to a standard, because there wasn't like arbitrage for unhappy customers was really, there was no recourse. And a group of people, knife makers that hold each other to a higher standard was part of that. The benefit of being in the guild. You could go to a show that was a guild show. You could expect that you were going to get vouched for, and people who were spending real money at the time would know that if something was wrong, or if they didn't know whether it was a well built knife, the guild helped to kind of give that stamp of approval. And it wasn't a rubber stamp. It was like these guys went through the ringer, as it were, in order to prove that they had what it took to have morals and ethics when it came to knife making. And if I think about it that way, I mean, you can charge back on somebody with a credit card, or you can blast them on social media. But if there's a reputation that can be nurtured through an organization where you're just a bunch of like-minded makers that they want to put out a good product, they want to put out quality, they stand behind their craftsmanship. We all kind of hold each other to that standard, and we also have the ability to represent or communicate with each other privately if we see something like this customer is saying something on Facebook, and you might want to get on top of that and figure out exactly what's wrong, and we give each other advice and stuff, and that I don't think that that's like a function of the guild in some ways, but I do think that it's a responsibility, like a fiduciary responsibility we have of sorts, to help bolster our fellow man or woman, and to try to foster the reputation component of knife making, so that way people can, when they see a maker, buy with confidence and invest in that maker, because they know that they care about about what their national or international reputation looks like. Um, you know, I guess that there's lots of naysayers about guilds and everything uh, that say that they don't need a guild to do that, and I totally agree. But it is cool to be part of something where everybody, for the most part, believes in that same core principle, and the ethics are kind of unwavering.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not gonna lie. I between when I was first approached and the time that I decided to try, there were plenty of people that were didn't recommend it, or at least didn't recommend it for themselves. And we're kind of quick to um, tell the bad but not the good. And so I just kind of had to decide for myself, and I agree with things you said and the reasons you said them. And it's I want to be more involved. So like I said, this last year and a half, really big transition for me. So moving forward for myself, I want to be involved in the guild. I want to be involved in the North Carolina Guild. A lot of great folks there too, in this neck of the woods. And I like the guilds. I like the guild concept. I like kind of like we discussed earlier. There are standards. In my opinion, a lot of times it's less important what the standard is, more so than there is or are standards.
Yeah, well, and like I get it. Like we live in a different world now than the guild was originally um, sprung out of. And there's lots of makers that are like, I just don't want this like good old boys club telling me what to do with my knives, judging me on things that they probably shouldn't be, yada yada whatever. And there's been a lot of drama in the guild, and I think that that really comes from artistic ego, because like I mean there's lots of knife makers that were in the guild in the day that were not full time. They were doing it more as hobbies, and there was other knife makers that decided to do it full time, and their entire reputation and lives um, depended on the relationship and the symbiosis of the guild. So you get people arguing over um, uh, difference of opinion, but sometimes they feel very vehemently about that because of what it means to them personally. And I think with anything, you're going to get that a little bit. You're going to see the bureaucracy and politics of it, but um, by and large, I think that there's a larger group of people that comprise the guild now that are more focused towards answering those, um, uh, the I guess like the naysayers in the industry. Like, what does the guild do for me? Well, it's obvious that accreditation does not sell more knives, and it's obvious that a group of people convened together doesn't necessarily sell more knives. But um, there is this thing that happens with getting together and being able to commune with other makers and to go to shows and to think about knives more holistically. That it's like the tide that raises all boats. When you're in it, it's just an energy that you get that spurs you on to do more things and to encourage you to think differently or outside of the box, or to push yourself in a way that is unique to you, but also keeps with the tradition of knife making. And for me, at least, I think that that's always been something that I've valued, is the energy that kind of collects around makers, and to try to keep pushing that envelope. It's like Matt Martin. Like I love him. He is such a kind and insightful person. The fact that he will promote the guild and everything says a lot about him and his desire to continue to support the history. Because I think that that's something that he and I really appreciate about the guild is the legacy. But Matt will tell you, like, if something is just not looking right, or if you've not gone the extra mile. But this is also a guy who's fit and finish. Like his good enough is such a high threshold for him that I would say that in fixed blades especially, and what he's doing, he's an elite maker, and his reputation precedes him. I mean, he's not going to tell you something that he hasn't tried himself and struggled at, or failed at. Like he's pounded the pavement until he's reached a level of perfection that is his standard, and he's not going to give you advice or tell you something that he would not support and do himself. I mean, he makes really, really good knives.
Yeah, totally agree. His wife does the sheaths too, right? Skin bender, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
she
yeah. Jenna's pretty cool
yeah,
too.
we connect quite a bit so on the leather stuff. So I make throughout this process I started making these clips for leather sheaths, to be used for pocket sheaths or belt sheaths, and we connected over that years ago. Um, and matter of fact, we just spoke a couple of days ago. But yeah, no, couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Well, so what does shows look like for you, and what is like the next, I don't know, year or two? I mean, I know that you like are going to be expanding your shop and doing some more, function based tooling, but I mean, what's the trajectory of your knife business, and kind of where you want to go with this in the next few years?
Yeah. So for when I started getting serious about this, my knife making again, roughly 2017, I was shooting to do knife as a full-time profession once I retired from the army. Things didn't work out quite like that, and we just kind of I had to come to the realization that that just wasn't in the cards at the time. So, I still got another decade or so before, I think anyway, about a decade or so before, if I'm going to make knife making the only thing I'm doing, it's about a decade from now. So we move into the new house this coming summer, so summer 24, about the same time as Blade Show, I think. And as far as the shop's concerned, long term, within this next year, my goal is to have a folder. When I say next year, this 24, sometime in 24, have a folder off the ground, a solid, functional, my design folder. So that's the goal. I think I'll be able to achieve that. Not that I need necessarily more space to do that, but I've just been holding off with certain few pieces of equipment to do that. And so that's kind of like my near term within the next year goal, to get a folder off the ground, do the move, get through the move, and get a folder off the ground. Shows specifically. So I went, attended, just walking and talking, Blade Show West. That was my first time doing the Utah. What a phenomenal place that is, to do a big knife show. And I can't make Blade Show Texas. Um, and I will go to Blade Show Atlanta again, just walking and talking. And I am not dead set yet, but I may turn into a once a year knife show, Blade Show Atlanta. And that might end up being how I do things, because that's like a 5.5 hour drive for me. Um, and again, if I'm not doing this full time, I save a lot of money not going to all the shows. I hate it. I'm not I'm not telling you that's how it'll turn out, but it might be the way I go. It's just doing one Blade Show a year, that being, the big one, obviously. And I don't know. Well, that's kind of my trajectory, what I'm on. So that will be 25, probably June 25. First Blade Show Atlanta that I'll do. That's kind of like my goal.
Yeah, yeah. I love hate Blade Show Atlanta. Like I love the venue and I love the people, the energy, the pit. Like everything is real great. I don't really like the locale so much. It's there's a lot of traffic. It's hard to find hotels if you're not in the few main hotels. So I've Airbnb twice. Um, and it always seems like it's just as expensive as staying in the hotel. But I always drive, and so that's what 10 hours for me, I think. And it gets expensive. I think that the show circuit for me has been a really great experience, and to have that energy. But I also think there's a lot of pressure to sell knives at the show when you have that much invested, and if you don't break even, it kind of gets a little bit not depressing, but definitely like you've lost out on a component that you probably should be focused on, which is your business. Yeah, but the feedback loop is actually really great, because there's sometimes that things hit real well at shows, and there's other times when they don't, and it gives you that boilerplate, as it were, to decide on whether you're going to augment your product offering or your finish, or things that you are bringing in quantity, or whether you're going to stick with it and just be that presence at the show so that people have more chances to get your product in their hands. So indispensable, I think, having the show circuit as a feather in your cap. versus just doing everything online. But your prices are so reasonable for the level of fit and finish that you have. I mean, you have to sell a lot of knives in order to be able to sustain a show like that and make it, break even. I think that anybody who's like sitting on your knives for any reason really needs to buy them, because I could easily see the value of your knives being twice what you're actually charging, and I think that that's something that people should be aware of, is that they're getting a hell of a lot of knife for a price that's very, very reasonable.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate that, and I know I'm biased, but I agree. Um, but we've spoken about this, and could probably go round and round, and some theory, some hard economics point or something like that. But about the shows themselves, I agree with you. I think that I don't know. I personally think you got to make some shows at least here and there. It just I, I- One guy I know, he calls it, I like his mentality. He says, you got to look at shows more like a marketing or advertising expense more than anything else, and just even if you don't break even, it's, think of it in the marketing or advertising bucket versus anything else. I'm not necessarily the smartest business guy. That's how I look at it. That's how I believe it. And I think they're just fun. I agree with you that you know better feedback, right? Than 10 people walk by your table, 9 out of 10 pick up this one specific design that you hate as the maker, but 9 out of 10 people pick it up. Like, that is a immediate feedback that if for nothing else, that design grabs attention. Okay, you might not like it, but maybe you should invest some more time in that particular design. You get that immediately. And I agree with that. I think it works both ways. And then, like I said before, that when I'm going to shows, I tell you, pictures of knives, for whatever reason, they are never fair one way or another, in my opinion. It either pulls out some scratch that you can't see with the naked eye until you put it under a camera, or it makes everything look so good that it's not a fair representation of the quality in the other way. So, getting that product in your knife or product in front of people at a show gives them the opportunity to pick it up in their hand, look at it, look at the maker, meet the maker, and see firsthand. So anyway, yeah, I'm a big believer in shows. I haven't done that many as a maker. Some of the bigger ones, and then of course I've been to a ton, and walked through them. But yeah, that's my overall goal as far as the my pricing is concerned. It's just this conundrum. I think for me, it's a little bit different because it's not a full-time job. I have a lot of flexibility, but I will tell you what I absolutely hate is I hate knives sitting on shelves, and it weighs on me, and so I price them to move, and I get more enjoyment out of making. I think than selling, and the selling for me is really to keep up with equipment, things like that, being able to expand and do things more in the shop. So that's my take.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I agree with that. I've thought about that too. Like, sometimes selling a knife and selling them quickly, even though maybe it's $150, $200 cheaper in some ways. Yeah, if you sell them, then it is better than them sitting there for forever, because the new tool that you want to buy, maybe you have to sell 25 knives, right, versus 10. But if the price is right and there's enough interest, then you can still get that piece of equipment or whatever. It just takes more knives to do it, and as long as the over under makes sense, then you kind of just got to do you. I've struggled at times with sales. It ebbs and flows, and I've tried not to make selling the defining factor for my knife making. What I'm really interested in is when I price out knives and when I make knives, I want it to always be a value back to the customer that they could sell that knife at any point in time and recoup their money, and that in some way it appreciates with time, time and materials and stuff like that that I put into it, that it has some investment quality. So I try not to price myself out of that market where it is advantageous to a customer to buy it, simply because it can be used. But if it doesn't get used, they can also like trade it or sell it, and it has a value that is, they can laterally trade out knives or things like that too.
Yeah, I agree. I've throughout my time so far as a maker, I've tried all of the formulas, they have for pricing, something handmade, whether it was knife or something else. Like I've tried all the formulas. I've you know, read all the books on it, but I find that the knife market to be such a fickle thing. I, I don't. There are certain things I think that are unique to the knife industry. Maybe not holistically unique, but more unique, and the name and how a maker got his or her name, and I don't know. It is very fickle, and I don't. One of your other guests said it too, that almost everyone buying you know, or type of knives, they don't need it. It's not like toilet paper, they don't have to have it, or food or water, I guess is probably more appropriate to say. They don't have to have it. They want it. It's a want versus a need. And I don't know, it's just a fickle thing to me. Why overnight did this uh this knife or maker, why did it just skyrocket? Like what happened? I don't know. And I think I am often perplexed by the kind of like which came first, chicken or the egg? Like, a maker, um, did did the maker, for whatever it is, whether it's the name and the desire to have a piece of his or her equipment, like how did that how does that happen? I always scratch my head with that kind of stuff. Did and I think there are different theories, and I'm not sure any of them are right, but like some makers will say, hey, you got to price it. It is what it is, and that's it. Don't budge, and that's how they make their name. And then others will say, well, I grew into mine, right? Like I started at this price, and I grew into it and grew into it, and my name grew. And then people, once they knew that I was a trusted guy or gal, that's when they, I was able to price it accurately. And so I think there's different theories with that, and I'm not sure either is an exact science.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that is up to each person, and that's part of the value proposition that each person has too, because one person's style of selling is really very uh, intrinsic to who they are. I think the uh, the way at which they think about what a square deal is, and the way that they price their knives out. I know lots of knife makers who sell their knives for way less than another maker of equal quality, right? Um, and I know some who sell not so great knives for a lot more than you think that they would be able to get in the market. And that's the thing. It's like I like selling a knife to me is like the least important part of making a knife. Although you need to be able to make it to recoup costs and whatnot. But if you treat the vocation of knives as trying to zero in on the things that are the most important to you, like the quality, the aesthetics, the utility, the art, whatever those things are, that tells a lot about the kind of vision you have. And there's going to be customers that pick that up eventually, but it's to me, it's probably the most vain component of knives. Like I hate talking about selling knives. I would just like, ideally, I would just like to make them and post them up somewhere and them sell themselves. But it does seem like when you have an expensive hobby slash business that you're trying to run, there's always this next expectation of the economy of it and whether you're actually breaking even or whatever. And um, I've just I'm more interested in just the world of knives than I am in trying to hawk my own stuff. It definitely interests me more to talk to those customers and to figure out what they're doing with their knives and to maybe have a place at their table with some of my stuff and it means something to them. I'm more about the relationship than the dollar amount that's associated with that, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. For a while there at my beginning, I bear with me, because it's gonna sound weird. It was almost like a game to me, right? And I had a ton of fun doing it, and so I was like, dude, not only am I this is my escape at night instead of like watching TV, for example. Nothing wrong with that, just that's what I prefer to do. This hobby grew into a passion, and not only did I have fun making it and thoroughly enjoyed making knives, but you're telling me people wanted to also spend money on it, and so it became this thing like, oh my gosh, this is great. Not only do I avoid piling up boxes of finished knives on the shelf, people actually want to buy them. Buying them enables me to keep up with the belts and the consumables at the beginning, and then that grew into crap. Now I can buy a nicer variable speed grinder and so on and so forth, and it is still very much so that way for me. And I would love to had been a full-time profession for me. Um, but as I was just kind of past that point in time, and some goals that we still have left in life won't doesn't really match up with that. But I tell you that the fun of it is still very much the case for me. Like it is my escape. It is my hobby. It's my passion. And I just love knives and I love going out there and making them. And that's part of the lower price too, that I think that I'm less concerned about that. Yes, while I believe that you get a really solid deal, and great materials with one of my knives, it's there's a lot of enjoyment from it that I have, and so that's kind of my mentality. As it hasn't changed too much for me. If I were to be doing this as a full-time profession, I relied on it to pay mortgage, I might have a drastically different mindset, maybe not, but I would certainly have a little bit more hustle than passion, maybe, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's kind of my mindset and has been for a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love your knives. I love your aesthetic. I love your uh, personality. I mean, you're a good person, and I, you know, as like time goes on, like I'll just keep an eye out on your work and see what new things you come up with. Because, like for me, there's lots of stuff that you do that I just look at it. I'm like, man, like that was a really good idea. Your execution was great. I wish I would have thought of that type of stuff. And I find that like in my life, as sometimes as I don't have enough time or family stuff comes up or work stuff comes up, that I don't get to make as many knives as I'd like to. That you're one of those makers that I actually live vicariously through. Being able to see that kind of unfold on social media and getting to see you succeed in that in the way that you do. I'm a big fan of yours. So I mean, just keep rocking it because you're pushing an envelope that I just really respect and admire.
Hey man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I I enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoy it. I think that the balance is hard, I think that's a lot of people go through that, just like any other thing in the world, that there's a balance, I get worried. Am I playing with my boys enough? Am I giving them enough attention? And how about my wife, or whatever? But, I've been doing it for a while now, and I think I've got the balance healthy, and I plan to keep doing it. I think that, this the folder, when I first started, I had always said I'm never doing a folder. That's just, I don't see any, I'm not going to have any enjoyment in it or whatever. But obviously I've changed my mindset, and we'll see how that goes. I I think that talking with other makers, that's kind of opened my eyes, when makers would readily tell you everything. You know, didn't matter what the question was, um, and that opened my eyes to the generosity of other makers, and it really told me something that's for about a decade now that has held true, is that uh, you know 99, again, my statistics, no one else's, but the vast majority of makers are going to tell you um, everything that you they're going to answer every question you ask them, and it may be in their own style, it may be their own process, may not be the best process, etc. It may be theirs versus the best, but each maker doesn't really see, I think, a lot of competition with other makers. They're mostly in competition with themselves. So they're, trying to make a better product, trying to make a cool thing or a new widget or whatever that may be. And so I've tried to give back, and I feel like I fail, miserably. So I'm overly responsive, I think, sometimes when people ask questions. I take the time to give them my supplier. I take the time to send a video or a picture of here's what I'm talking about, or point them in a resource, direction to a resource, or website, etc., or other maker that could answer it better. So I don't know. And that's something I want to continue as well. But I don't know how to bring this full circle back to looking forward to doing a folder. We'll see how it goes, if it ever sees the daylight.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be really cool to see your aesthetic on a folder because I think that there are benefits. I know that some people, they make slip joints or folding knives, and they're like, well, I wasn't very good at making sheaths, so I decided to make a folder so I never needed a sheath, right? And that creative problem solving is great for some people. It's the motivation that sometimes they need to push in a different direction. But I do think that when you do that, man, it's going to be to the nines. Like I have no doubt that whenever you push into that realm and everything, that you're going to do like a phenomenal job at it. It'll be cool to see it, and I hope that at least for the personal benefit of like you doing it and having it done, just to see whether it's something that is to your liking. Is that's part of the process. I think that's what's cool about it, and it's like the podcast and kind of proliferating this knowledge or a different mindset about how to think about knives. That's really what I want. I don't want to put up a bunch of YouTube videos and make knives just to do stuff that a lot of other guys are passionate about. I want to talk about the esoteric nature of knives and the pushing people to think outside of the box and whatnot, and having guests like you on, where you try to hyper focus on things and to get really good at it and perfect it. I think that's an important point for people to at least have some insight in, because if you through repetition do things enough, and if you think enough about a problem, you can solve it. You could do really just phenomenal things in a way that maybe nobody else thinks of
Yeah.
doing.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, I like I, I was, like I said, I was trying to kind of catch up on some of your podcasts, and one that I listened to right before or earlier today was with Alex Night Watch, and we've been friends for a while now, and we just exchanged knives. Well, I was pretty late with mine, but nonetheless, your comment there just kind of made me think of him, and um, it's just fun. It really is, and I look forward to the future, what the future holds.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast and talking, and I know that you want to get back to your family and whatnot. I mean, it's a humongous honor to have you on here. It's great to get to talk to somebody who I feel like I've followed for quite a long time, and I appreciate all of your insights and everything too.
No, absolutely. Again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you asking me to do this. It was my honor, and I had a great time. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure too, man. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.